The wind whispered through the towering evergreens like a voice long forgotten, brushing the forest floor with cold fingers and scattering the first brittle leaves of October. Bella Swan stood at the edge of the Lapush woods, her boots soaked through from the wet moss and her breath rising in quiet curls that disappeared into the gray morning. Fog curled around her ankles and wrapped her in its chill, but she didn't shiver. Not anymore. Not after what she'd seen. Not after everything she had come to understand. The truth had unraveled slowly, thread by thread, until it lay bare before her like an open wound. Edward's departure had hollowed her out, left her stumbling through days like a ghost in her own body. And for weeks, she had told herself that love like theirs could not be undone so easily. She believed he left to protect her, and maybe part of that had been true. But it was not the whole story. There were things he hadn't said, things he'd never meant for her to discover. It was Jacob who pulled her out of that darkness. Not with romantic promises or poetic words, but with fire, with warmth, with fierce, unrelenting loyalty. While Edward left her to break, Jacob held her up when she could barely stand. He made her laugh again, gave her strength when she thought she'd never feel whole. At first, he had simply been a refuge. Then he had become something more. And when the truth came crashing down, it was Jacob who stood beside her. She remembered the day the last veil lifted. It was a simple thing that did it. She had returned a book to the library in Forks, and, passing by the record archives, curiosity led her to a collection of old newspapers. The article was dated just 2 weeks before. Edward had reappeared in her life, and it chilled her blood colder than any vampire ever had. 3 hikers found drained of blood near the Olympic Peninsula. A couple's car discovered wrecked by claws too large to be human. The murders had stopped just before Edward came back, as though someone had cleaned up their mess before the Cullens returned. At first, she told herself it couldn't be them, but Jacob knew. He had always known. The Cullens didn't feed on humans. That was their claim. But no predator starves forever. The truth wormed into her heart and took root. Carlyle, with all his gentleness, had looked her in the eyes while hiding what his family had done. And Edward, with his careful affection, had let her believe he was a savior. She confronted Jacob that same night, and he didn't try to lie. He didn't try to soften the edges. He simply told her the truth as it was, that the wolves had known for years that the Cullens walked a fine line between restraint and instinct, that their presence had always meant danger, that Forks remained untouched only by the constant threat of the pack. And it was in that moment Bella made her choice. Not out of anger, not out of heartbreak, but clarity. She saw Edward now for what he had always been, a creature of cold beauty, carved from temptation and shadows. And she saw Jacob as something wild and real, not perfect, but true. She chose Jacob not because he was safer, but because he was honest, because his warmth was not a lie. From then on, she was not just a girl mourning lost love. She became something else, something older. She joined the pack in every way she could. She couldn't shift like them, not with her human blood, but she trained, she ran. She learned the land like it was her own skin. She memorized every sound in the forest, every shadow that moved too quickly. She listened to Jacob speak of the old legends, of the battles that had taken place long before she came to Forks. She stopped dreaming of immortality and started fighting for the present. And then the murders started again. It began with a boy from Port Angeles, missing after a late-night drive. Then a fisherman found torn apart on the rocks south of Lapush. The Cullen family had returned only weeks before, claiming they meant no harm. They played their roles so perfectly elegant, compassionate, just slightly aloof. But Bella had seen too much to be fooled again. When she confronted Edward, his face betrayed nothing. He spoke gently, as if the past had not happened, as though he expected her to fall into his arms and forget it all. But she saw something behind his eyes now, a hunger barely veiled. And for the first time, she didn't feel a trace of love, only pity. He was not the boy she had fallen for. Maybe he never had been. Jacob stood behind her that day, his hands clenched at his sides, the pack waiting just beyond the trees. The tension between wolves and vampires had always simmered, but now it boiled. A fragile piece that had been held together by secrecy and silence was breaking apart. That night, they voted. Around a fire deep in the woods, the pack stood in a circle, their faces lit by flame and fury. Bella sat beside Jacob, her shoulders squared, her heart steady. They would protect their land. They would protect the people of Forks. They would fight. The Cullens didn't wait long. Emmett struck first, launching an attack on the southern edge of the reservation, hoping to draw the pack out. It was brutal and fast. And only the training Bella had undergone kept her alive long enough to hide when she needed to help where she could. Jacob fought like fire incarnate, and Bella saw in him the strength of 10 men. She tended to the wounded, laid her hands on torn flesh, and whispered comfort where she could. The war had begun, and she was no longer afraid. The vampires didn't care about peace. Not anymore. They wanted territory. They wanted control. Forks was just the beginning. Bella changed in those months. She grew sharper, stronger. The forest became a second skin. The pack taught her their ways, and she gave them something in return: strategy, insight, human intuition. She watched the Cullens from the shadows, listened to their movements, learned their patterns, and she never once looked back. She didn't mourn the girl who had once dreamed of eternity in marble arms. That girl was gone, buried with the lies she had believed. The final battle came when the sun refused to rise for 3 days. The sky was choked with storm, the air thick with dread. Bella knew it would happen that night, the night the cold finally tried to swallow the warmth whole. They met deep in the forest, where the trees grew thick, and the earth was red with memory. The Cullens came silent and perfect, and the wolves rose like flame from the earth. Bella stood between them, her eyes locked on Edward's. He tried one last time, words like honey and poison wrapped together, but she was unmoved. She had made her choice not just for herself, but for everyone who could not fight for themselves. She raised her voice and called the charge. The battle was chaos and beauty, death and purpose. She fought with everything she had, with the weight of every lie burned behind her. When it was over, when the forest fell silent, and the wounded were gathered, and the dead were honored, Bella stood beside Jacob once more, his arms around her, his breath warm, alive. They rebuilt in the months that followed. The forest healed, the town never knew the truth, only rumors and legends. Bella stayed. She never left Forks. She walked the woods every day, her steps steady, her eyes open. She was not a vampire. She was not a wolf. She was something else, something stronger. And when she looked into Jacob's eyes, she saw not just love, but fire that could never be extinguished. The days after the battle passed in a strange stillness, as though the forest itself were catching its breath. Bella moved through the silence like a shadow, her limbs heavy with exhaustion and her mind haunted by memories she couldn't yet shape into words. The fire that had raged in her during the fight had cooled to embers, but they still burned inside her, slow and steady. Not the wildfire of vengeance anymore, but something deeper: purpose, forged through loss. She woke each morning before the sun rose, the sky still painted in gray, and walked the boundary of the reservation. She knew every tree now, every stone and crooked path. The land knew her too. The spirits of it didn't speak in words, but in breath and wind and weight. The wolves called it instinct, but Bella felt it like a pulse beneath her skin, as if something ancient stirred within her every time her feet pressed into the damp moss and pine needles. She belonged to this world now, not the world of glittering marble and hollow eternity. Jacob rarely left her side. When he wasn't patrolling with the others or mending the wounded fabric of the pack, he walked with her. They didn't speak often. Words had become too fragile, too simple for the weight of what they'd seen. Sometimes he would look at her, and she'd see it: the fear. Not of her, but for her. She had survived the battle, yes, but she had changed. There were moments when she caught her reflection and didn't quite recognize the eyes staring back. They were older than they had been, harder. And in them lived a question neither of them had spoken aloud. What had she become? Bella was still human, in blood and breath. But the line between the girl she was and the thing she was becoming blurred more with every day. She could sense the wolves before they shifted now, could feel their energy ripple through the earth. Her hearing had sharpened, her reflexes quickened. Her body had adapted to the fight, even if her genes had not. And there were dreams, strange, vivid dreams that lingered like smoke in her waking mind. She dreamed of wolves with eyes of gold and trees that bled light. In the dreams, she always stood at a crossroads, and no matter which path she chose, something was always left behind. Sam and the elders began to notice. They didn't question her loyalty. She had earned her place among them with blood and fire, but there were whispers, quiet meetings when they thought she wasn't listening. Jacob tried to shield her from it, but she knew. They were wondering if she was changing in a way they didn't understand. She didn't blame them. She was wondering too. It was Leah who approached her first, one night after a long run under a silver-slivered moon. Leah, who had once hated her for reasons Bella hadn't understood, now watched her with a cautious respect. She sat across from Bella in the clearing, her lean frame draped in flannel. a faint sheen of sweat still clinging to her forehead. "You're not like other humans," she said quietly. "Not anymore. You feel the pack, even when we don't want you to." Bella didn't answer. She stared into the fire, watching the embers crackle and shift, and felt a slow ache rise in her chest. She didn't want to be something else. She had already left one world behind. Was she now losing this one too? "There are legends," Leah continued. "Older than the pack, older than the cold ones. Stories about humans who weren't born wolves, but were claimed by the spirit of the forest anyway. Women who stood between the worlds and didn't belong to either. Guardians, they called them. Or sacrifices." Bella looked up, and in Leah's eyes, she saw the echo of something ancient and afraid. A warning, maybe. Or a plea. That night, Bella dreamt again. Only this time, the crossroads were gone. She stood alone in a clearing, where the trees grew in a perfect circle, their trunks smooth and white, their leaves glowing faintly with gold. In the center was a pool of still water. Her reflection stared back at her, but it wasn't the face she wore now. It was older, her eyes glowing faintly amber, her skin marked by something she didn't recognize, symbols, etched in light across her collarbone, her arms, her throat. She looked like something both human and not, and as she raised her hand to touch the water, the surface broke and a voice whispered her name. She woke with her heart pounding and sweat soaking her sheets. The next morning, news came from the north. A stranger had crossed into Denali, a vampire unlike any the wolves had ever known. Nomadic, brutal, and with a gift no one could explain. He called himself Alaric and claimed to be the last son of a line older than the Volturi. He traveled alone, but his presence was like a spark in dry grass. Vampires were gathering again, drawn by something darker than politics or territory. Drawn perhaps by blood. Bella's. They didn't understand it at first. The pack scouted for signs, tried to find the pattern, but it wasn't about Forks anymore. It was about her. Alaric wasn't hunting humans. He was hunting Bella. Jacob was the one who pieced it together. He brought her to the edge of the cliffs, where the wind screamed against the rocks and the sea churned below. He told her the truth, not as a protector but as an equal. His voice, low and steady. "You're changing, Bella. Not like us. Not like them. Something else. And they can feel it. They want it. Whatever's inside you, it scares them." She turned away from the sea and looked at him. The boy she once thought of as a son had become something larger now. A man forged by duty, by battle, by love. He would die for her without hesitation. But that was not the path she wanted. "Then I'll stop it," she said. "I'll end this before it begins." Alaric came 3 nights later, cloaked in mist and death. He did not speak as he moved through the forest, but the trees withered in his path. The wolves met him with teeth and fury, but he moved like smoke, untouchable. Bella stood in the center of the clearing, her pulse steady, her heart a war drum, and when his eyes met hers, a strange calm settled in her bones. He reached for her without words, as though claiming a lost heirloom. But the moment his fingers brushed the air between them, she moved, not with the speed of vampires or the strength of wolves, but with something else, something ancient. She raised her hand, and the wind bent to her will. The trees groaned, the earth trembled. The fight that followed did not belong to the world of men. When it ended, Alaric lay broken at her feet, and the air around her shimmered with something unseen. The pack approached slowly, not in fear, but reverence. Jacob touched her arm, and she turned to him, still breathless, still burning. "I don't know what I am," she said, her voice cracking. "You're ours," he answered. "And we are yours." The forest grew quiet again. But Bella knew peace was only a pause between storms. She wasn't a guardian. She wasn't a sacrifice. She was a reckoning, and the world would remember her name. The night after Alaric fell, the forest pulsed with silence, not emptiness, but something denser, electric. Bella felt it in her veins like a storm waiting to break, each breath charged with the weight of something she didn't understand. She lay in the lean-to Jacob had built for them, on the far edge of the reservation, where the trees grew ancient and the stars pierced the sky between their limbs. Jacob's warmth slept beside her, steady and slow, his body curved protectively, hers. But Bella didn't sleep. Sleep had abandoned her. The dreams had turned violent. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw fire licking at the edges of trees, wolves surrounded by ice, her own face fractured into pieces of light and shadow. In her dream she ran, but her feet never touched the ground, and no matter how far she fled, the blood-red eyes followed, watching, waiting, claiming she rose before dawn, and moved through the forest barefoot, the earth cold and wet beneath her soles, the dark, damp air catching in her lungs. She moved like a ghost, soundless, unseen, but the forest saw her. It welcomed her. The plants shifted slightly as she passed, not with the clumsiness of wind, but with intent. Something had changed since Alaric's death. Something inside her had awakened, and now the land responded. Jacob found her kneeling beside the river, her fingers submerged in the icy water, her expression unreadable. He didn't speak at first. He simply crouched beside her and watched the way the current bent around her skin, as if it feared to touch her directly. Her eyes met his, and they were not the same eyes he'd once known. They were deeper now, wider, filled with something otherworldly and searching. "It's not over," she whispered, though he hadn't asked. That was the thing now, she didn't need words to feel what the others felt. Jacob's fear, his love, his resolve, it echoed inside her chest, like her own. Something's coming, and it's not like before. It's not a rogue, it's a force. They're gathering. Jacob nodded slowly. He had felt it too. Not the same way she did. Not with the earth speaking in riddles and dreams, but in the subtle shifting of the wind, the way the birds no longer sang. The forest had gone too quiet, and the scent there were new ones drifting in, unfamiliar, wrong. Not just vampires. Others. They went to the council that night, and Bella stood before the elders without trembling. She was no longer a guest in their circle. She had earned her place. Still, they watched her with uneasy reverence, like one would watch a flame flickering too close to dry grass. Jacob stood beside her, silent and strong, his loyalty written in the lines of his jaw and the set of his spine. "There are more coming," she said, her voice calm. I don't know from where, but I feel them. They're being drawn here, not for land, not for blood, for me." A murmur rippled through the circle. Billy Black leaned forward, his eyes narrowing beneath furrowed brows. "You speak as though you're no longer one of us." "I don't know what I am," Bella admitted. "But I know this: I won't let them take this place. I won't let them take the pack. Whatever I've become, it's because I chose to stand with you. I still do." Leah spoke next. She had become Bella's closest friend in those dark months, their bond forged in loss and fury. "Then we fight. And if they come for you, they come through us." It wasn't bravado, it was promise. And so, they prepared. The next weeks passed, like a heartbeat stretched across endless days. Scouts were sent as far as Vancouver and Idaho. New faces appeared at the edge of Forks, nomadic vampires with hollow eyes. Faces stretched thin with hunger and exhaustion. Not part of the Volturi, but not innocent either. They didn't attack. They didn't speak. They simply watched. Waiting. Bella spent hours alone in the forest now, drawn to a place beyond the cliffs, where the trees grew in strange, spiral patterns, and the ground steamed faintly at dusk. She had never noticed it before. The wolves said. No one had, but she knew better. The land had been waiting. She sat there for hours, cross-legged on the stones, her palms open to the sky, listening. The visions grew stronger, and with them came fragments of understanding. She saw flashes of women long ago, cloaked in fur, eyes glowing like her dreams. She saw a line of power stretching back through centuries, always tied to the land, always tied to blood. Not vampire, not wolf, something older. The guardians Leah had spoken of were not myth, they were memory, and Bella was the next in the line. But there was a cost. Every gift, every moment of clarity, took something from her. Her body ached in places it never had. Her sleep was shorter, her hunger strange. She could no longer eat meat. Her blood ran hot one day and cold the next. She wasn't dying, she was becoming, and the enemy felt it. One night, a girl came stumbling from the woods, her skin torn, her eyes wild. She collapsed at the edge of La Push and whispered one word before dying. Volturi. The name fell like ash over the campfire. The Volturi had always kept their distance from Forks, uninterested in the politics of wolves and vegans. But Alaric's fall had changed that. His death had sent a ripple through the vampire world. A human had killed an immortal, not just any human, a girl. And not just a girl, a force of nature they didn't understand. They would come not for vengeance, but control. The days that followed were fevered. They trained harder. The boundaries were redrawn. Bella no longer merely supported the wolves. She led, not with pride or desire, but because they turned to her. Even Sam, even Billy. She had become something more than ally, more than pack. She was the shield between their world and annihilation. Jacob rarely left her side. They slept little now, And when they did, it was entangled. His heartbeat grounding her, when the visions became too sharp, when the pull of something beyond her skin grew too strong. She feared she would disappear into it, whatever this power was, that she'd become something unrecognizable, something too distant for love. But Jacob never flinched. He held her tighter, reminded her with every touch who she had always been. Volturi arrived at dusk, their procession gliding into the clearing like death made flesh, cloaks of black eyes like garnets. Aro at the front, smiling as if this were a celebration and not an execution. He addressed Bella first, his voice smooth and thick as oil. "My dear girl, you've caused quite the stir." She didn't bow. She didn't speak. She stood barefoot on the stones of the spiral clearing, her eyes calm, her hands loose at her sides. The forest hummed behind her, the wolves flanked her, eyes glowing, muscles coiled. Aro stepped closer, the others fanning behind him. "You've awakened something," he said. "Something we cannot permit to grow unchecked." "Then try to stop me," Bella said. And they did. The clearing erupted into violence so fast that human eyes couldn't have followed it. Cloaks swirled, fangs flashed. But the wolves were ready. They moved as one, teeth tearing through shadows. Bella did not fight with fists. She fought with will, with fire that leaped from her hands and light that seared through skin. She spoke in a tongue she had never learned, and the forest responded. The battle was unlike anything Forks had ever seen. When it ended, the ground was scorched and littered with ash. The Volturi were scattered. Aro was gone. The spiral clearing pulsed with energy, ancient and new. And Bella stood at the center, her body glowing faintly, her eyes bright as dawn. She was not human. She was not wolf. She was something else entirely. And the world would never be the same. When the silence finally settled over the scorched clearing, it was not peace that followed, but a strange, reverent stillness. Smoke rose in gentle spirals from the charred earth, curling around the trunks of the trees, like incense from some ancient rite. The sky above had begun to lighten, a dull blue spreading across the horizon as dawn approached. In the hush between night and morning, Bella stood motionless, her bare feet stained with ash, her chest rising and falling with deep, slow breaths. She could hear everything now, not just the forest, but the heartbeats of every living thing within it, the flutter of wings high above the canopy, the burrowed sleep of a fox beneath the roots, Jacob's heartbeat, steady and strong, calling her back from the edge of something vast and irreversible. She turned toward him slowly, and for a long moment he only stared, searching her face like he was looking for a shadow that might have replaced her. His body was bruised, blood smeared across his jaw, but his eyes were clear and dark and full of her. Without a word, he moved forward and wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly as if anchoring her to the ground itself. Bella let her forehead fall against his chest, and only then did she let the tears come. Silent, burning, purging, she had survived, they all had. But nothing would ever be the same. The wolves gathered around them in a loose circle, some limping, others shifting back into human form, as the threat dissolved into memory. The bodies of the Volturi, what little remained of them, had already begun to decay into dust, as if the forest itself refused to house their presence for more than a moment. The battle had been decisive. Aro's arrogance had led him here, but it was his blindness that destroyed him. He hadn't come to destroy a threat. He had come to tame it, to twist it into a weapon. And he had never understood that what he tried to claim had already routed itself too deeply in the soil of something wild and ancient. The days that followed blurred into one long twilight. The sky over Forks remained overcast for nearly a week, thick clouds clinging to the treetops like morning veils. Bella barely left the sacred clearing. The pack brought her food, kept watch in shifts, gave her space without leaving her alone. They had seen what she'd done. They had seen what she'd become. And while none of them said it aloud, the truth passed between their eyes like smoke. She was no longer just Bella. She was something the legends had never fully prepared them for. Sam approached her on the third evening, his usual authority softened by uncertainty. He stood at the edge of the circle, his arms crossed, his face grim. When he finally spoke, his voice carried not command, but caution. "You've become the heart of something we don't understand." The wolves answered to the land, but now the land answers to you. That balance matters. It always has. Bella nodded. She felt it, too, that pressure between what she was and what she must be. Power was no longer an external force. It was woven into the very fiber of her being. She could feel it constantly now, humming just beneath her skin, always present, always watching. But it came with a cost. Her senses had sharpened to the point of pain. Every sound was louder. Every light was brighter. She could no longer eat cooked food. She stopped sleeping. Her dreams had fled, replaced by waking visions of fire and earth, and the far-off pulse of things older than time. When she closed her eyes, she saw faces she didn't recognize. Women from ages past. Guardians like her, perhaps, or warnings. Jacob remained constant. He didn't flinch at her changes. He never stepped away. At night, he sat beside her, his warmth keeping her tethered to her human memories. He spoke of the pack, of the border patrols, of the quiet beginning to settle over the region. No more vampire movement, no more shadows. But something loomed in his voice, something unspoken. Eventually, Bella asked, "What are you not saying?" He hesitated. Then he took her hand, his thumb brushing against her knuckles like he was memorizing them for the last time. "You're not dying," he said, "but you're not living like us anymore. And that means one day, maybe soon, you'll have to choose what you're going to be. You can't hold on to both forever." Bella didn't respond. She knew he was right. Her body hadn't aged in months. Her skin was harder than it should be. And her blood, it no longer ran hot or cold. It simply existed, pulsing with something not entirely her own. She returned to the spiral clearing the next day, alone. The stones were still warm beneath her feet. The trees leaned slightly inward, as if listening. She knelt in the center and closed her eyes. She reached inward, searching for the source, not to summon more power, but to understand it. She found a thread buried deep, a root from which everything else had grown. When she touched it, pain sliced through her memories, not her own, flooding into her mind. A young woman standing at the edge of a cliff, her arms outstretched, flames curling from her palms. A child marked by stars, walking into a field of ash. A scream that broke the sky, and a voice, always the same, whispering the same truth. "You were chosen, not born." Bella opened her eyes and screamed. Jacob was there in moments, holding her as she trembled, her body seizing with the remnants of the vision. She gasped, shaking, the taste of blood in her mouth. "They're not done," she whispered. "Not the Volturi, not the others. There's something else. Something deeper." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Then we fight again," he said. Bella shook her head. "Not this time. This isn't a fight we can win with claws." That night, she called a gathering. Not just the wolves, but the elders, the humans who had remained unaware of the deeper war. She stood before them, not as a girl or a myth, but as truth. She explained what she was, what was coming. The world was changing. The rules no longer held, and if they wanted to survive, they had to adapt. Some were afraid, some denied it, but most listened, because Bella Swan, the girl who once walked invisible through Forks High School, now stood with the weight of centuries in her eyes, and the voice of the forest in her lungs. She wasn't a vampire. She wasn't a wolf. She was the bridge. And her time was running out. She and Jacob sat by the fire after the gathering, the stars above them flickering like warnings. She leaned into him, letting her fingers rest against his pulse. "If I can't stay," she said, "I need to know you'll lead them." "I'll lead them," he replied, "only if they follow willingly. And I'll wait. As long as it takes." She closed her eyes and rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For loving me through the change." His breath was soft against her hair. "Always." The days passed like falling leaves, silent, certain, and impossible to stop. The crisp edge of winter crept into the air, touching the wind with ice and laying frost over the trails that wound through the La Push forest. Bella moved through it like a spirit, always barefoot, always listening. Her body no longer felt the cold. She didn't dress for weather anymore. She dressed for ritual. Her senses belonged to the forest now, tuned to the song of roots and stone and memory. The wolves knew when she was near, not by scent, but by silence. Even the birds quieted when she passed beneath the trees. Jacob still followed her, still waited, but she saw the fear in his eyes, now not of her power, but of her departure. Something inside Bella had started to slip beyond what could be held or named. She saw more than the present now. She saw glimpses of futures, braided together like smoke. She saw the ocean rising in the dreams of children. She saw the ash of cities long vanished. She saw a girl in another century, somewhere distant and forgotten, holding a fire in her palm and walking alone into the dark. The same fire burned inside Bella now. She could feel it in her chest, a living thing that throbbed behind her ribs, pulsing in time with the earth's own slow heartbeat. She stopped eating entirely. Her body didn't waste her weight, simply stopped needing. She drank from the river, but it wasn't thirst. She slept less than an hour a night, and even then, her dreams were not dreams but messages, symbols, warnings. She would wake with blood on her palms, though she had not fought, with names on her tongue, though she had never met them. The elders began to call her something ancient in their stories, the Lulu one who walks between. Not human, not God, not creature. A living answer to an old prayer, or perhaps a punishment long delayed. One night, she sat with Billy Black alone. He had not asked to see her, but she came anyway, something in her pulling her toward the dying man like gravity. His breath came slow, his eyes glassy with age and the weight of things unspoken. She knelt beside him, and he turned his face toward her like a sunflower following a dim sun. "You're leaving us," he said, and it was not a question. "I don't know," Bella replied. "You do." She didn't argue. She couldn't. She had seen it in her own hands, the fraying thread of her time with them. The longer she remained, the more the world bent around her, the more strange things became. The earth welcomed her, yes, but it was starting to reject others. The trees leaned only to her. The birds nested only in her path, and deep beneath the soil, she felt a rumble, a heartbeat out of rhythm with the pack. The balance was tilting, and she was the weight tipping it. Billy reached for her hand, and she gave it. His fingers were brittle, dry as paper, but his grip was steady. "You were never meant to be saved," he whispered. "You were meant to save. That's heavier than most can carry." "Then why me?" "Because you asked the right question when no one else would." She stayed with him until the morning. When the sun touched the edge of the horizon, his breathing slowed, then stopped. He left the world in silence, and the wind through the window stirred only once, like something had passed through. Jacob didn't cry, not in front of anyone, but when Bella touched his face that evening, she found salt on his cheek. "He was the last father I had," he said quietly. "I know." They stood by the cliffs for a long time that night, the sea crashing below, the sky stripped bare above them. Jacob turned to her at last. "I see you, Bella. I see what you are, and I know what it means. You're still hoping I'll stay. I'm always hoping, but I'm not asking." She leaned into him, and for one moment, the world fell away. There was no magic, no curse, just warmth, just skin, just the thrum of a heart that had loved her before she knew what love was. "If I leave," she whispered, "it's not because I stopped loving you." "I know," he said. "It's because you became something love can't hold." She stayed one more week. She walked the woods one last time, touching trees she'd grown up beneath, listening to the laughter of children who didn't know her name, watching the wolves run together under the moonlight. They howled for her once, all of them, a chorus that split the sky and settled in her bones. She cried for them, for what they gave, for what she could never repay. The night she chose to go, there was no ceremony, no farewell. She simply stood at the spiral clearing, wrapped in the mist of her own breath, and turned toward the north. Her hair fell loose down her back, her hands bare, her face calm. She did not take food. She did not wear shoes. She carried only the weight of the forest and the fire in her blood. Jacob watched her go from the edge of the trees. He didn't call out, he didn't follow, but long after her shape vanished between the trunks, he stayed, unmoving, and whispered to the wind, "Come back when the world is ready." Bella walked for days, through mountains and rivers and woods that had never known names. Her body never tired, her feet never bled. She no longer felt time, only change. The further she went, the more the world softened around her, less noise, less pain. She passed animals who looked at her without fear. Birds landed near her feet and took off only when she moved. She saw things others never would, colors that didn't exist in the language of paint, light that curved like sound. She found herself drawn to sacred places, stones marked with carvings, groves where the trees all grew in perfect circles, rivers that glowed faintly under the moon. And eventually, she stopped. It was a high place surrounded by cliffs on all sides, with a pool of water so still it reflected the sky even when clouds covered the stars. She built no shelter. She needed none. She sat beside the pool and waited. She didn't know what for, only that something was coming. The nights grew longer, the dreams quieter. One evening, as the wind died completely, she looked down into the pool and saw not her face, but another's, a woman older than time, with Bella's eyes but not her voice. The woman opened her mouth, and Bella heard a single word, "Choose." It echoed across the stone, across her mind, across the universe inside her. She saw two futures, one where she returned to La Push, fading slowly, dying with love wrapped around her bones, becoming a myth that softened with age, and one where she remained here, silent, eternal, guarding the thread that held the world together. Alone but never lonely, awake even when others slept. She closed her eyes, and chose. When she opened them, the world was different, not changed, but clarified. The trees were taller, the stars closer, her heartbeat gone, replaced by something deeper. She was no longer Bella, she was the Lilu the and far away. Across forests and oceans, a young girl dreamed of a woman with fire in her hands, walking through silver trees, whispering the names of stars. Years passed, though she never felt them. Seasons blurred into one another like brush strokes on wet canvas. The snow came and went, rivers swelled and retreated. Trees reached higher into the sky and then shed their golden green to sleep again. But she remained constant, a breath held between ages. Her form had barely changed. Her face still bore the shape of Bella Swan, but her eyes were older than any mirror could comprehend. Her skin no longer reflected light, it absorbed it. She was less a figure than a presence. The land had claimed her entirely. The clearing had become sacred. Word of it spread slowly, without effort, as though whispered from tree to tree. Wolves wandered north and paused when they passed its edge, their ears twitching, their eyes wide with inherited memory. Humans too, sometimes, hikers or old women with stories in their bones. They never found her directly. The forest curved around her like a veil, letting through only those the land deemed ready. When they did see her sitting beside the water, silent as stone, they didn't speak. They simply stood in her presence until the air became too heavy, or too light, and left with hearts marked by something they could not name. She did not speak, not for years. The fire inside her had quieted, not gone but tamed, woven into her marrow like thread through fabric. She was no longer becoming. She had become. Time passed through her now, instead of around her. She didn't age. She didn't sleep. She no longer dreamed. But sometimes, when the wind blew from the south, she remembered. She remembered brown eyes filled with heat and loyalty, fingers tangled in hers, the scent of wood smoke and salt, the rhythm of footsteps behind her, on the trail, the sound of her name spoken with laughter and love. She remembered Jacob. Once, a bird brought her a scrap of fabric red flannel, frayed at the edges, soft from years of wear. She held it for a long time, not crying. She no longer cried, but the ache inside her spread like rings in water, quiet and wide. She never stopped loving him. She simply loved him from a place where time no longer held weight. But the world outside did not remain still. Far away, the Volturi regrouped. Their core had been shattered by her hand, but power is rarely destroyed, only displaced. New names rose, new figures, cloaked in civility and shadow. They avoided Forks for years, haunted by the fire that had consumed ahora. But their curiosity grew restless. Whispers reached them. Rumors of a woman who did not die, who had not turned, who had touched the fabric of the earth and survived. They sent scouts first, disguised as nomads, always at a distance. She felt them, of course, long before they crossed into her sphere. She sensed the cold void of their hunger, pressing into the horizon like a storm. She did not move, she did not threaten. She simply sat and watched and waited. But they were not the ones who came first. It was Jacob. She sensed him long before she saw him. Years had aged him gently. He was broader now, his jaw heavier with the weight of years, his eyes softer but no less fierce. There were lines near his mouth from smiling, and silver beginning to thread through his hair. He moved slower now, but with the confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove his strength. He stepped into the clearing, as if stepping into a memory. And when he saw her, something caught in his throat. "You look exactly the same," he said. His voice was hoarser, now, deeper, a man's voice, no longer a boy's. She stood. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. All the years between them folded like paper. Her skin did not warm, her eyes did not tear. But inside, the ache uncurled like a forgotten flame. "You don't," she whispered. He laughed quietly. "No, I suppose I don't." He approached her slowly, his steps deliberate, reverent, like she was a relic he feared to break. "I waited," he said, "for a long time. I know." He looked around at the trees, the water, the curve of the sky above. "It's beautiful here. It listens." He nodded. Then his eyes turned to hers again. "I thought I'd forgotten your voice, but I didn't." She smiled faintly. "Neither did I." They sat beside the pool, side by side. The quiet between them was not awkward, it was ancient. He told her about La Push, about the new generation of wolves running the woods, about Leah's leadership, strong and iron, about Seth and Embry and Quill, and how the forest still echoed with their howls, about the children born with amber in their eyes and dreams full of silver trees. He spoke of love, too, of someone who had found him when the silence had grown too long. Her name was Tally. She was kind, she was brave. She reminded him of Bella, not in face or form, but in defiance. She asked questions when no one else would. Bella listened. She did not flinch. She did not weep. But her hand found his, and they sat like that for a while, fingers woven together. Not lovers, not ghosts, but something in between. "I don't have much time left," he said softly. "The others are strong. The pack will go on. But I had to see you one last time. You'll find me again," she said. "Where? In the wind, in the earth, in the eyes of the girl who will ask what comes next." He squeezed her hand. "Then promise me something. Anything. When they come. And they will, don't fight them with fire." She turned to him. "Fight them with truth." She nodded. He stood, slowly, painfully. His knees cracked, his breath caught. He looked at her one last time, and for a moment he was 17 again. Wild, loyal, incandescent. "I love you," he said. She stepped forward and pressed her palm to his heart. "I always have." He turned and left. She watched until the trees swallowed him. She never saw him again, but she felt his death. The moment his heart stopped, the forest bent inward. The air thickened. A thunderbird screamed high above, and Bella fell to her knees as pain unlike anything she had ever known tore through her chest. It was not physical. It was not mortal. It was the rupture of a tether that had held her grounded, even after she had left the world behind. She lay on the cold ground for 3 days, unmoving. The forest hovered around her like a breath unexhaled. And then, as the fourth dawn broke, she stood. The Volturi came that winter, not cloaked in threat, but in curiosity. They came not to destroy, but to offer. Ahora was gone, but new leaders had emerged, sleek, cunning, smiling monsters dressed in reason and diplomacy. They had no interest in vengeance. They wanted only to understand. They brought her a child. A girl no older than 5, with violet eyes and skin like pale glass. She didn't speak. She simply stared at Bella, with a knowing far too deep for someone so small. "She's a hybrid," they said. "Like what you might have become, if you had turned." Bella touched the child's face. She saw the lie immediately. Not a hybrid. Not a child. An experiment. A weapon. They offered her a place among them. To teach. To lead. To elevate their kind to something more than predators. She said nothing. She turned and walked away. The child followed. Bella didn't look back. She walked for 3 nights and returned to the sacred pool. She sat the child beside her. The girl didn't speak. She simply watched. "You're not theirs," Bella whispered. "You never were." The girl blinked once, slowly, and then leaned her head against Bella's arm. Bella taught her nothing with words. She showed her the trees, the stones, the silence, the curve of bird flight, the way the moon pulled on the bones beneath the soil. The child learned not how to fight, but how to see. When spring came, Bella sent her away, not with fear, not with sadness, but with a whisper. Be the question they can't answer. The girl disappeared. Into the world, Bella remained, and for the rest of time, however long that would be, she sat beneath the stars, listening to the roots shift, to the clouds stir, to the soft song of the earth continuing forward. She had been Bella Swan. She had been a girl in love, a warrior, a reckoning, a guardian. And now she was a name, the trees whispered, a light in the woods, a promise the world had kept. She walked for many years before she learned her own name. The forests whispered it sometimes when the wind was high and the leaves turned their silver undersides to the sky. Not a name given by those who made her, but the one the earth gave her when she began to remember. Alaya. It came to her one night as she stood beside a wide river in the shadow of a collapsed mountain. Her bare feet sunk into the cold mud. The river spoke it into her bones. Alaya. She said it aloud, once, and the stars seemed to pause, as if listening. She did not remember much of before, only shadows and light. Only voices murmuring about strength and lineage, about control. There had been white walls and the sound of water dripping. A woman with red eyes who called her darling. A man with long fingers who never smiled. They had not loved her. They had studied her. She had not spoken. Not once. Not until she met the woman in the forest. Bella. She had not needed words there. She had needed silence. And she had been given it. Nights by the pool with no fire. Days under canopies of green, where the sky breathed slowly. The way the woman moved with gravity and grace. Like she belonged to something older than time. Had left a mark in her. The woman had touched her forehead with cool fingers. Before she sent her away. Be the question they can't answer. So, she walked. Not like a child. Not like a soldier. She walked like the wind did. Never belonging to one place. Never asking permission. The world didn't frighten her. Cities rose and fell on the horizon. Lit by neon and fear. But she never lingered. Her feet took her to ruins. To deserts where bones stuck up from the earth like broken fingers. To jungles where the vines whispered old names of power and sleep. Sometimes, she was seen. People spoke of a girl who never aged. Who did not speak. Who stood in places where violence had bloomed and made the air still again. She became rumor, then story, then myth. And always, always. She remembered the way Bella's eyes had looked when they first met. Not curious, not pitying, but understanding. Like she had been waiting. Alaya found others, eventually. Not like her, not exactly, but close. A boy in the Alps who could smell thoughts. A girl in Morocco who could quiet entire rooms just by walking through them. A man in Brazil who healed wounds with a look and cried when he touched the sea. They came to her one by one, not summoned, but drawn. They brought no weapons. They had no names when they arrived. She gave them names, the rivers told her. They were not an army. They were not a rebellion. They were a chorus. They did not fight the Volturi. The Volturi faded on their own, like old stone losing its carvings to wind. Power based on fear cannot hold against silence. And wherever Alaya and her kin stepped, silence followed. It wasn't that the vampires vanished. They didn't, but they were no longer feared. The covens that once ruled in shadow found their hunger dimmed, their strength muted. They still fed some out of necessity, others from ritual, but no one looked at them the same way. Their whispers no longer shaped history, and those who tried to seize control again found themselves unable to sleep. Plagued by dreams of silver-eyed girls and spiral clearings, Alaya never returned to Bella's clearing. She did not need to. The clearing lived inside her. At night, when the others slept in the tall grass beside stone ruins, or beneath the stars of cold mountain passes, Alaya would stand alone and listen. Sometimes, she would hear a voice. Not sound, but certainty. You are the answer. And still the question. One day, in a city of glass and steam, Alaya found herself drawn to a bookstore. She had never entered one before. She didn't read, not like others, but this time she felt something. The woman behind the counter looked up as she entered, old, with gray hair twisted in a braid down her back. Her eyes widened. "I've dreamed of you," she said. Alaya tilted her head. The woman reached below the counter and drew out a faded book. The cover was cracked, the title long worn away. She opened it carefully and showed Alaya a page, an illustration, not of her, but of Bella, sitting by a pool of water, a girl beside her. Below it, in faint ink, the firekeeper and the wild child. It was a story, a myth. Elia traced the image with her finger, and something shifted. She had never cried, not once, but in that moment, tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness. From recognition. She took the book. The woman did not ask for payment. She walked again after that, but slower. Her silence was heavier now, but not burdensome. She began to speak in dreams. Two people who had never seen her, but woke up knowing a little more about the world, about themselves. She never used her name. She didn't need to. She grew into the stories told about her. Some said she could stop storms. Some said she could see time bend. Some said she was the daughter of the woman who lit the sky on fire once, long ago, to protect the world from those who walked in blood and silver. None of them were wrong. Years became decades. Her face never changed. But the world around her did. The lines between human and creature blurred. Children were born with moonlight in their veins. Wolves no longer needed the full moon to shift. The blood drinkers who remained learned to walk among others, not as predators, but as memories. The age of shadow passed. And one night, beneath a red moon, Alaya stood at the edge of a city once called Rome, and felt something move beneath her feet. Deep, seismic, familiar. The spiral. She knelt on the ancient stone, and when she placed her palm to the ground, she felt Bella's pulse. Not literally, not physically, but the essence of her. The choice she had made. The fire she had become. And Alaya knew the time had come. Not for war, for remembrance. She gathered her chorus, those strange and gifted wanderers who had found her, who had walked at her side for decades, never asking why, only listening. They met beneath the stars in a place without name, and there she spoke for the first time in their presence. She told them the story of a girl who loved too fiercely, of a boy made of heat and loyalty, of a world split between life and unlife, and how love had walked away from both to become something else. Of Bella. And then she asked a question. What do you become when no one is watching? They had no answer, and so she smiled. Good, because a question that can't be answered becomes legend. That night, they lit fires not to warm themselves, but to mark the memory. People came, hundreds, then thousands. They didn't know why. They just felt the pull. They stood in silence around the flames and listened. The wind spoke to them. The soil hummed. The stars pressed low. And somewhere in the north, beneath roots and moss and the hush of endless time, a clearing glowed faintly. It was not empty. She was still there. She had always been there, and as Leia stepped into the center of the fire circle, she raised her hands, not to summon power, but to share it, not as a weapon, as a gift. The flames turned silver. The people wept. The world, for a moment, remembered itself. The world no longer looked the way it once had. The lines of the continents had softened, reshaped by tides and tremors, by the slow breath of centuries. Forests had returned to places once drowned in steel and concrete. Rivers had carved new veins through the land. Great cities had risen and fallen and risen again, each more fleeting than the last. The sky itself had changed, less cluttered now, less bruised. Stars shone brighter. Moons shifted. The days moved gently forward, no longer rushed by the ticking hands of old clocks. In the far north, deep beyond the reach of maps and satellites, there was a place untouched by architecture, by roads, by names. It was not marked in red on ancient borders, nor was it seen by those who wished to own it. The forest there was older than language. The wind spoke in syllables no one had ever recorded. It was a place of silence and memory, and at its center was the clearing. It did not look special. A shallow dip in the land, ringed by trees that leaned inward, as if to hear something eternal. Moss covered the stone spiral. Leaves carpeted the soft earth. Deer passed through it without fear. Birds nested in the branches above. And in the stillest hours of twilight, the ground hummed. A low vibration, like the earth itself remembering. No one visited it anymore. Not in the way they once did. The stories had faded from the lips of storytellers, and even the name of the girl who had first sat there, Bella, was spoken now only in riddles passed among the wind. But the story had not died. It had transformed far away. In a city carved into cliffs overlooking the sea, a child was born with hair like ash and eyes like molten gold. Her cry at birth cracked a mirror in the midwife's hand. She did not sleep her first week of life. She stared instead, wide-eyed, at the world around her, as if already grieving what it had lost. Her name was Lyra, and from the beginning, she did not belong. As she grew, the birds followed her. The cats in the market bowed their heads when she passed. She could touch fire without burning. She never cried, and when the elders looked into her eyes, they looked away quickly, murmuring about old stories. About the girl who had once loved a wolf and lit the world on fire. When she turned 7, Lyra began to dream. Not of fantasy, but of memory. Of a spiral clearing ringed by trees. Of a silver-eyed woman who sat with her back to the world. Of fire and forest, and a pool that reflected the stars. The dreams came every night, each time longer, each time clearer. Until one day, Lyra woke with a stone in her hand. Smooth, black, warm, etched with a single spiral. She left the city that morning. She did not say goodbye. She walked alone, barefoot, with a pack slung across her shoulder, and the stone pressed to her chest. People who saw her later could not describe her face. Only that they felt quiet after watching her, that the world seemed stiller in her wake. She walked for many days, though she never tired. The land opened before her, like it had been waiting. Forests that swallowed other travelers let her pass untouched. Rivers parted their current. The wind blew always at her back. And then, one night, she found it, the clearing. She knew it before she stepped inside. The air shifted. The trees whispered her name. The moss glowed faintly in the moonlight. She walked to the center and sat. And waited. Across the stars. Something ancient stirred. She sat for a day, then 2, then 3. On the 4th, a figure stepped from the woods. She had not aged in 1,000 years. Her hair was longer, threaded with starlight, Her skin shimmered faintly, like heat above a desert road. Her eyes were still silver, but behind them lay galaxies. Eliah. She looked at the child and knelt. "It's time," Lyra said. Eliah touched the stone in her hand. Her fingers trembled. "You are the first to find me in an age. I am not the last." Eliah smiled, the first smile she'd made in centuries. "You remember her?" Lyra nodded. "I see her when I dream. I feel her in the roots." Bella. Eliah sat beside the child. The forest bent closer. "Tell me," Eliah said, "what do you know of the fire?" "Only that it started with a girl who made a choice no one else would make." "And what choice was that?" "To love the world more than she loved herself." Eliah closed her eyes. A wind passed through the clearing, lifting her hair, stirring the leaves. For a moment, the spiral on the ground lit faintly, glowing with a soft white light. "You will carry it now," Eliah whispered, "not the fire. The memory. Will I see you again?" Eliah opened her eyes. "Not like this." Lyra blinked. "Like what, then?" Eliah touched her forehead. "Like wind, like rain, like the pulse of stone beneath your feet." She stood, and for the first time in a millennium, she stepped out of the clearing, not as a watcher, but as a whisper. Lyra remained. She grew there, slowly. She learned the language of the birds, of the moss, of the light between leaves. She carved stories into bark. She painted spirals onto stones. She sang when no one was listening, and the forest listened anyway. Years passed, then centuries. The world shifted again. Climates changed. Seas rose. Names were lost and new ones made. But always, the clearing remained. People came in dreams. Pilgrims walked with bare feet and no map, searching not for gods, but for understanding. They came with questions. They left with silence. And high above it all, the stars turned. Bella had become the myth. Eliah had become the echo. And Lyra had become the next question. One day, long after the age of glass and metal, when stories had returned to the fire, and people once more lived close to the land, a child looked up at the stars and asked her mother why the spiral on her palm glowed when she touched water. And the mother knelt and said only this: "Because once, a girl loved the world more than herself, and the world never forgot."